Prime Minister there, as you can see, not answering a request for comment on Trump's speech from Canadian media. He is en route back to Canada now, ahead of a cabinet retreat in Quebec City that will take place tomorrow and Friday. With me now to unpack the Prime Minister's trip, as well as this so-called deal that Donald Trump is announcing, CTV News Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbon, New York Times Canada Bureau Chief Martina Stevis-Gridneff, and with me here in Ottawa, CTV News Senior Political Correspondent Mike LeCouture. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. We were anticipating a conversation solely about what Donald Trump was saying where Canada is concerned, Joy, but then late in the day, this post about Greenland, from my impression, and you would know better than me, we have absolutely no details about what this actually means versus the kind of thing that Trump is saying. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, look, Vashi, this is vintage Donald Trump. The tough talk, lashing out, threatening forced tariffs. Suddenly, there's a deal. And doesn't he look good? And was this the play all along? I will say, he has a fondness with Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who actually came to Donald Trump's defense earlier in the day, saying, look, he's got a point here. Arctic security is very important. We should maybe beef it up. They had discussions, and so this framework could basically be a number of things. It could be allowing more U.S. bases on the island, which under a 1951 treaty, the U.S. can do anyway. Perhaps getting other NATO allies like Finland, Norway, Canada to send more security in, more troops, more icebreakers, that sort of thing. Those are the kinds of things that might ease Donald Trump's concern. And also, he mentioned the Golden Dome. Perhaps there's some kind of infrastructure or investment in infrastructure on the Arctic island. But no, we've heard nothing from the White House in terms of details, just that Donald Trump seems pretty pleased with this framework, this possible deal, saying it will be indefinite for all time.
Martina, I know it's at times, maybe most of the time, a bit of a fool's errand to try and figure out why the president is doing what he's doing, or in particular, why he's backing down from something that he's said so frequently over the last number of weeks. In this case, it seems like with tariffs a number of months ago, the markets may offer a clue. And I want to bring up for our viewers sort of a trajectory over the past few days as the rhetoric hyped up on Greenland and the market sank. And then this morning, when the markets, they all closed up, as our viewers can see there. This morning, as soon as he said he wouldn't use force, you saw a big bump in the markets. And then as soon as this announcement was made, an even bigger bump. Does that offer us any clues, do you think?
I think, obviously, he's been under pressure. We know that Americans are against it. Polling has shown that. We know that many Republicans are against it. Polling has shown that. I just think that we should be, I know there's great relief in this de-escalation right now, particularly for Greenlanders and the Danes. I'd be a little worried about Mark Rutte negotiating sovereignty on behalf of Denmark and the Arctic, much of which is in Canada. I think that the way that this so-called resolution or deal is framed raises more questions than it answers, and certainly here in Canada too.
Yeah, Martina's point segues exactly into what I wanted to ask you, Mike, because particularly that line, the entire Arctic region, like right away, alarm bells in our bureau, like that, that clearly includes Canada. Does Canada have any information on what the heck this means?
Not yet. And, you know, we have at the Bureau here tried to reach out to the Prime Minister's office, understanding that the bulk of the Prime Minister's office is now flying over the Atlantic, due to land here back in Ottawa at roughly about 8:15, 8:30. So no answer just yet. They are working on one, the Prime Minister's office tells us. Same thing with Global Affairs Canada. They're likely also trying to parse through it themselves, Vashi, because whether or not Canada was part of this deal, is part of this deal, that's unclear. We know there had been discussions, there have constantly been discussions about our defenses on our northern border, specifically in the Arctic, making sure that we can guard against any kind of incursion from Russia or China. We know, and you know, I was on that trip with Martina, the Prime Minister's first ever trip as Prime Minister, March 18th, he lands in Iqaluit and announces a $6 billion over-the-horizon radar that he says is going to go up there, that will be surveilling in the Arctic. So is that part of this? You'd have to think that's part of the Golden Dome. Canadian government hasn't been able to say yet. And as I said, partly because they're likely just getting some of the information now.
Interesting to note, if we go back a few hours prior to that, Joy, for the president's speech to Davos, that the prime minister had already left Davos when that speech occurred. So he was not among the world leaders who were there for it. That didn't stop the president from responding essentially to the speech that the prime minister delivered yesterday, in essentially saying that Mark Carney did not sound so grateful in his remarks. What do you make of that response? What should we make of that response?
You know what? That's, again, typical Donald Trump. He has, lashed out at NATO allies, saying, I'm paying all this money. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have stepped up your defense spending. We spend all of this. There's so many grievances with this president. Yesterday and all this week, he talked about the NATO alliance and how they would not defend the U.S., but we always defend everyone else. He feels somehow that he's hard done by, or that the United States is hard done by all of this. Saying ungrateful is a typical insult he has done to, said about the Europeans, said about Canada, saying they're ungrateful. But yeah, the Prime Minister stood up for Canada yesterday, and Donald Trump did not like that. I mean, we saw what has been described, especially here in Washington and in America, everyone quoting Mark Carney saying he has described a rupture in the NATO alliance and this breakup of the NATO alliance. And suddenly everybody went, oh, my goodness, we're on the brink of catastrophe here, something that has worked since the war, nations getting together and working things out. And suddenly it was all kind of kapoof. But yeah, insulting Mark Carney, he insults many people and Europe. But suddenly he thinks that he's got a deal, he's got something, and a lot of people, actually, they compliment Mark Rutte, saying he's become a bit of the Trump whisperer by listening to Donald Trump, taking his concerns seriously. But the one thing we don't know, Vashi, is there some kind of deal for the U.S. to own Greenland? Trump wouldn't say.
Right. On the Canada-U.S. dynamic and the sort of speech versus speech, I just want to play Martina a clip from Jameson Greer, the USTR, who gave an interview to Bloomberg and was asked very specifically about kind of that rallying cry for middle powers to band together and stand up to the United States, and how Canada fits into that, given the negotiations that are going to take place over the next 6 months. Let's play that clip, and then I'll get your reaction.
I just think that Canada, the Prime Minister himself said it, they're a middle power. History doesn't swing on the hinge of Canada's geopolitical decisions. 75% of their GDP depends on the United States. So I'm not terribly concerned about it. They're always going to have a constructive relationship with us.
So what do you take from that, Martina, and how do you think Trump is sort of internalizing what the Prime Minister did yesterday in Davos?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, first of all, with regards to why Trump spoke the way he spoke about the prime minister, I think Trump's a bit jealous of the attention. I think he was a bit triggered by the fact that everyone is feting Mark Carney as the person who has best sort of described the situation. I also don't think that the zinger toward the prime minister in Canada is what he thinks he is. If anything, they're kind of agreeing, and the president's comments echoed the prime minister's comments. In fact, the prime minister, I think, is quite open about the fact that he thinks Canada's dependence on the United States is too much. And I think his platform is to try and change that. Whether he succeeds or not is a separate question. Obviously, Trump's tone was menacing, right? You played the clip. There's no way to kind of read it other than, well, you depend on us for your survival. Nice country you've got there. That was the undertone. That is the undertone. He doesn't like the attention going to someone else. He doesn't like the praise going to someone else, particularly someone who's on his very, very long list of grievances. We've actually published on NewYorkTimes.com a list of everyone he's upset with based on his Davos speech. It's quite long. So I do think that the prime minister is probably going to try not to respond to this. I think Greer is being another kind of explainer of Trump. And I think I would take Greer quite seriously. I think the tone is right. I think Greer kind of agrees with Carney in saying that, yeah, Mark Carney said we're a middle power. History doesn't hinge on middle powers. That's exactly what the prime minister was trying to say yesterday. That being said, I think those grievances do go into a vault. And you know, next time there's a flashpoint, he'll reach into that vault and bring up that grievance.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how tightly he hangs on to it, because if there's one thing the people around Mark Carney talk about a lot behind the scenes, it is the personal relationship that the two have developed, and the way in which the federal government, you know, leans on that essentially to advance their position. I have no idea if this will, you know, crack a blow to that, but it is, I think, Mike, something to watch for.
Yeah, and certainly the fact that that is something that we have known from, you know, all of the years covering Donald Trump, and I say this version of Trump and Trump 1.0, is how much he values those interpersonal relationships, but also, to Matina's point, how much he values that kind of praise, and especially that room. That's the World Economic Forum. Those are the people that Donald Trump wants to impress. So to hear that Mark Carney got a standing ovation the day before, certainly, as Matina was saying, likely was something that kind of, you know, needled him a little bit. But, you know, I was talking to some people on this side of the border who have been involved in Canada-U.S. relations in the past and have extensive relationships and extensive knowledge. And they said, let's take a step back for a second. This was a 1 hour and 12-minute speech by Donald Trump. Canada was mentioned for a total of 29 seconds. Obviously, on this side of the border, we're more concerned about it because of exactly what kind of impact that can have, because, as Jameson Greer mentioned it, but at the same time, a number of people have said, you know what, this might be a good time for Canada to take a beat and then pick up the phone. Good that they didn't have an interaction in Davos, because it's amplified in that type of room. Pick up the phone and say, hey, by the way, Kuzma negotiations, we got to get on that, right? And we're going to work together on this, and we're going to work together on the Arctic defense, and maybe an opportunity here, as some people are trying to say.
It's an optimistic view. We shall see. Yeah.